all that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, sure. Again, my name is Ankoma Anderson. I'm currently serving as a senior pastor here at the Welfare Baptist Church. I've been here serving in the pastorate for the past 4 years. It's been quite a journey. I've been enjoying myself, really trying to be immersed in the community while at the same time building our church from the inside out. I believe wholeheartedly that it's kind of difficult to be the church and not be involved in community. Churches that are inwardly focused. Thomas Rayner, in his very popular book, The Autopsy of the Deceased Church, talks about inwardly focused churches, and that those are the churches which often have a decline. But anyway, a little bit more about me. I'm a native of Greenwood, South Carolina. Born and raised, as I always tell people, in the metropolis of Greenwood, South Carolina. Grew up there on the west side of town. My family, born and raised there. My grandparents were born on that side of town. And I grew up there in a church called Macedonia Baptist Church, my home church. And I actually spent about 4 years pastoring my home church, which is Macedonia, prior to coming here. I grew up there under the leadership of my pastor and great mentor to me, the Reverend Dr. Willie S. Harrison. And as far as ministry, he was a staple in the community. He was one who really mobilized resources in the community to do ministry, and that's kind of the model of ministry that I use even today. So I'm thankful for his mentorship down through the years. He's 88 years old now, but still holds a dear place in my heart. All the wisdom and knowledge that he gave me over the years in massaging the gift of ministry.
When did you know you wanted to be in the ministry? How old were you when you knew that was?
Sure, good question. So this is what I always tell people about my call to ministry. I really cannot remember a moment in my life that I did not know that I was going to be a preacher. I've always known it. I literally can't think of a moment. But I'll tell you what began to happen, I guess, with my acknowledgement of my call to ministry. So in my mind, I had this idea that I had to find something else to do outside of ministry to really be able to sustain myself and to live. And so I went to school. I majored in chemistry. I was a chemistry major with the intentions of being a pharmacist. Did that with the idea that, being a pharmacist, that I would still have time for ministry, that I could do both things. Well, long story short, I ended up working at a pharmacy in Greenwood at Rite Aid, or Eckerd at that time. Worked there on the weekends, 12-hour days, believe it or not. Worked 12-hour days while I was in college, majoring in chemistry. And I found that being a pharmacist, it would not have been my personality, because I'm too much of a people's person to literally sit behind a desk and count pills all day. Long story short, I did want to change my major, so I kept majoring in chemistry, graduated Lander, did some research for NASA during that time, left and went to grad school to Clemson to get a PhD in chemistry. Well, in between me graduating and going to grad school, I accepted my call to ministry, and I was torn. I really wanted to go to seminary school at that time. But in the smallness of my mind, I guess I should say, I didn't think it was possible, because I didn't think I was going to be able to sustain myself at that time. So I went to school at Clemson, get a PhD, to work on a PhD. And during that time, while working on my PhD, I actually enrolled in seminary school at Gardner-Webb University, which is in North Carolina. So I would literally go to the lab at Clemson in the morning, start my experiments. I wake up at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the lab and start my experiments. And I would drive to North Carolina, to Gardner-Webb, to go to seminary school, stay there all day. And then at the end of the day, I would come back to the lab and work up my chemical reactions. And so I was doing that. End up graduating. Well, I actually end up quitting the PhD program went to Gardner Webb full time, and while I was there, my professors found out that I had been working on a PhD in chemistry, and they was like, "Man, what's wrong with you? You're almost done with the PhD in chemistry. You need to finish." So I started working on both of them at the same time. And graduated from Clemson, later graduated from Gardner Webb, and the rest is history.
Now, I went to seminary. I know a lot of seminary. I don't know that I've met anybody else that's got an MDiv and a PhD in chemistry. Have you run into any other in your fellowships?
Well, actually, I think I know one other person. I can't remember his name. We met quite a while ago. Actually, pastors in Virginia. I think he has a PhD in chemical engineering, and he went to seminary school. But it's a very rare thing to be involved in the sciences altogether, and also in ministry.
How has that helped or shaped your view of faith, knowing being a person of science as well?
That's an excellent question. Actually, when I was going to seminary school, and the entrance essay that needed to be written, it actually shaped my perspective of who God is. So, of who God is and how God is involved in science. Because there are so many people that will say, "Oh, well, science and religion don't mix." But that's the exact opposite of what I believe. I believe wholeheartedly that science is God unveiling himself. It's unveiling the mysteries of God. And so that's really shaped my theological perspective. It's really shaped my ministry, because being a scientist, I learned to be very analytical. And so I've learned how to read. And when I say how to read, I don't just mean just reading the words on the paper. Of course, I knew how to do that. But how to read into things in a very analytical type way, and evaluating things as I read them. And it's been a tremendous blessing, I believe, not only to me, but also to the places where I've served in ministry. For example, when I pastored in Greenwood, I founded a nonprofit organization by the name of the Westside Community Development Center. And the Westside Community Development Center, one of the aims there was the neighborhood that surrounded the church was a neighborhood where lots of marginalized and underprivileged children were. And so my goal was to serve them in ministry. One such way we did that was by starting that nonprofit. And as an arm of that nonprofit, I founded a summer camp that is known as CREST, C-R-E-S-T, which stands for Children Reaching Excellence Through Science and Technology. And that same program that I founded when I was in Greenwood, I've brought that program here to Welfare with me as well. And we've ran a summer camp called CREST for the past 3 years. This is the only summer that we're not doing it as a result of the pandemic. But it's allowed me to build partnerships with other universities. For example, since I've been here at Welfare, we've extended our collaborative efforts by building a collaboration with Clemson and the Call Me Mister program. The misters from the Call Me Mister program, they would come in and develop a science, technology, engineering, and arts curriculum that I believe has been a tremendous blessing to young people who have not thought about careers in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, because so many people are stuck on the idea, go to school, be a lawyer, be a doctor. Those things are they're all good, but everybody can't be a doctor. Everybody can't be a lawyer. Many people don't know are unaware that you can go to school, get a PhD in chemistry, go to school, get a PhD in engineering or some other science or math. And so I think it's all about exposure. So I believe me having been exposed to other areas, academic areas, have caused me to expose others in ministry to other areas to where I believe they can also flourish and be a blessing to the ministry as well.
And you keep a hand in it because you teach at Anderson University.
Yes. So currently, what I do, obviously, I'm full-time pastor here at Welfare, but I also like to keep my foot in the door in the world of academia. I think that's vitally important, not only just for my own personal development, but I just think it's important because it keeps me exposed to youthful thinking, to other areas of technology that sometimes the church may not be privy to. So I think that working in part-time in academics or education keeps me on the cutting edge. So I think that's vital.
If somebody's watching this and they don't know much about your church, tell them what they need to know about Welfare Baptist Church. What do they need to know about your church?
Sure. So Welfare Baptist Church, here we have three pillars that we really try to focus on here at Welfare. So everything that we do is surrounded are built upon three pillars. And those three pillars are evangelism. Of course, we are a church, so that's our number one focus. We always want to, everything that we do, we want it to be geared toward bringing people to Christ, making disciples of men and women in our world today. But also, I believe that it is vitally important to educate people. You can't really be a disciple if you're not willing to learn of Jesus Christ. And so we have evangelism, and then education. And as a part of education, our focus is both on Christian education as well as secular education. And the reason for that is I serve a predominantly African American church. And so when we think about the African American community, we've, and I'm generally speaking here, that when we think about economics, that we're behind 400 years. And so as a result, I believe that education is a way to economic empowerment. So we're focused on evangelism, education, as well as economic empowerment. So those are the pillars that our church stands on, and the ministry as we try to flourish during these transitioning times of the 21st century.
Yeah, and these cultural shifts now, what are the big challenges both for you as a pastor and for churches during this time? I mean, what challenges do they face now that they may not have faced in years gone by?
Sure. Well, first I'll say this before I go further. I think that when we think about the Bible and we think about the Christian church, or even when we think about the Hebrew scriptures, when we think about them, the reason that there is a biblical canon that exists is because of crisis. Had there not been a crisis, there would be no Bible. There would be no written canon that we use as our sacred scriptures today. And so I use that as a premise because I believe that anytime there is a crisis, that a crisis demands a response. And so as we think about where we are, the challenging times of the 21st century, it is imperative, it is critically crucial that the church will begin to live up to the challenge of the crisis that is at hand. And so when we think about where we are, when we think about injustices in our community, in the world of the justice system, when we think about injustices with healthcare disparities, in the world of economics, I believe, again, and there are other areas that there are injustices, but I believe, naming a few, that the church must respond. And kind of where we are, I think, in this pandemic, dealing with coronavirus, none of us have pastored. We've never served during a pandemic. So there is a crisis within the crisis. There's the crisis of the pandemic, but then there's a crisis for the church not necessarily knowing how to navigate and how to respond during these times. And so that in and of itself is a challenge. And I'll be very practical or very specific about a challenge that we've had here at Welfare, is how are we going to hold the faith community together during this time? Because we are accustomed to being together inside of the sanctuary. We're accustomed to doing, quote unquote, business as usual. So how are we going to meet those needs during this challenging time? And one such way we've done this, and pretty much everybody's doing this all around the country, of course, is through social media. But we've still gathered, of course, not in the sanctuary, but we've gathered on the parking lot of our church, having what we call drive-in or drive-up services. That's not my idea. something I saw on social media and kind of followed the trend that other people were doing. But it's been a tremendous blessing to our church. I think that it has also conditioned our people to think outside of the box, to know that God can actually move outside of the ordinary, that God can do something beyond the box that many of us have placed him in. And many people have placed God inside of the box called the sanctuary. And so now we're beginning to see God move outside of the sanctuary. And I also like to think about it in these terms as well, that so many churches, including myself, so many pastors, including myself, we've tried to move the church toward this idea of getting outside of the four walls of the church, doing outreach in the community. Well, I see this as a move forward. Everybody's not involved in the community, but we've definitely moved from the sanctuary to outside of the sanctuary. So this is a step in the right direction, moving toward community involvement.
And you've made friends with other pastors. How important is it to find some unity, particularly now among churches? I know in terms of both racial reconciliation and other ways for churches and ministers to begin to work together rather than just kind of keep their own towers going.
Sure. I'll use a simple statement, and I don't think I'm old enough to even know where it comes from, but I've heard it a ton of times in my life, that the Lone Ranger always gets shot down. So I think that in ministry, it's the same concept, is that we can't be Lone Rangers. We need each other. For example, my involvement, particularly with African American churches, I currently serve as the president of the Anderson County Ministers Organization. So that's an opportunity to dialogue with other ministers all throughout Anderson County, across denominational lines. And I think that's important because it keeps me open-minded. It helps me to get fresh ideas, to get fresh perspectives. And I think also the camaraderie and the friendship is important as well. And most recently, we've reached across not only denominational lines, but cross racial barriers. We're involved with predominantly white churches as well, trying to bring about not just racial reconciliation, but having conversations about injustice. Because I believe very strongly that justice is a spiritual principle. It is something that we need to deal with from a theological perspective. And so whenever...
And not just when you talk about justice, people want to think about that as the legal.
Sure.
But in the Old Testament, justice was economic justice, social justice. It wasn't just about the courtroom. It was
Right.
justice that everybody would have enough and be able to function as God intended.
Sure. And that's important. And so we need to have these conversations. As a pastoral caregiver, I go back to this idea is that whenever there is a problem, whenever there is an issue, those issues must be named. If you don't name the issue, you can never deal with it. And so when we come together to name the issue of injustice, if we never name injustice, we can never move to a point of justice. And so when we think about some of the injustices that I've mentioned just a few moments ago, and I'll pick out one in particular. When we start to think about economic justice, I believe that whenever justice comes about, that justice demands reparations. When we think about being just to an African American people who are economically oppressed for reasons, for a lot of reasons, that's not of their own doing, I believe that in order to be justly treated or in order to bring about justice economically, that reparations is needed. So,
there have been a lot of good men and women working this way over the years in this area, but a lot of them have sort of gone to that next generation or passed on. A lot of the big leaders have passed on. There seem to be a lot of young pastors, and not only the African American community, but community at large that seem to be sharing your vision. Now you're working with Austin Carty over at Boulevard, Josh Hunt at First Baptist, people who sort of share these visions for community. Do you think that's going to be a real way to move things forward a little faster than maybe in Gone County?
Well, I want to say this first because I guess my involvement with Austin, who's been a great friend, and also with Josh Hunt, those things have been recent developments. So I kind of have to start with the individuals that I've worked with in ACMO, in the Anderson County Ministers Organization, which is a predominantly African American ministerial organization. So I have to start there with the movement and the process, or the progress rather, and the things that we've talked about and discussed there. But I believe that our relationships there are solid, and as a result of us being solid and standing in solidarity, that other relationships have been born out of them. So I guess really what I'm saying is that if there is really going to be progress, if we're really going to move towards something, is that our community must stand in solidarity together, across denominational lines, across color lines, because if there are no allies in the fight, we can't get anywhere. When we start to think about all of the wars that have taken place throughout the course of history, had there been no allies, there would have been no progress. And so I like to think about what the fight that we're fighting, that the times that we're in. There's a famous Chinese book called The Art of War. And when we put that when we look at it from a theological lens or theological perspective, not that we're actually fighting and warring against each other, allies are needed. And there's an art to this fight that must be fought. And so one such art is the use of allies.
And the patience of knowing this is a long range fight for the allies.
Most definitely.
People are accustomed to quick, instant kind of things now.
Sure.
What's your favorite part of being a pastor?
My favorite part of being a pastor? Well, to be honest with you, that's a difficult answer. I don't know if I've ever thought about what's my favorite part. Well, I will say this. I really, really love community work. I love working in the community. I like to see the impact that ministry has on the community. And the reason why that's so important to me is because I believe wholeheartedly that the church is the central nervous system of the community. And so if the church is really going to be the church, it must stand, it must be the leader in the community that God has called the church to be. It must really stand on the rock and be the church. So yeah.
What if, do you have a favorite Bible passage or verse?
Yeah, so I think my favorite passage of Scripture is found in the book of James, which says, "Count it all joy." And the reason that's a favorite of mine, I think it's developed over the years. I think that when it became my favorite passage of Scripture, I don't think I realized that I was going to have to live it, actually have to live through what that passage of Scripture means. I believe wholeheartedly that those of us who are really prophets of the Lord, that those of us who are on the side of God, that there will be times in life where we will have to suffer. And really what James is saying in that passage of Scripture, that even when you find yourself suffering oppression, suffering however, that you can still count it joy.
If somebody's watching this and they've never heard of you, never heard of your church, and they say, I like this man. What do I need to know about their church? When could I visit? Where could I find out more about your church?
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, I'd say that we'd love to have you to come visit with us, share with us here at the Welfare Baptist Church. So currently, as a result of being inside of dealing with the pandemic, COVID-19, we're currently having worship services on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. in the parking lot on the back side of our church. We invite you to come, be a part. You can sit in your cars and you can hear the worship service in the parking lot. You can also find us on our Facebook page, Welfare Baptist Church, on our Facebook page where we're live streaming our services on Sunday morning. And you can also find out more information about us on www.welfarebc.com.